Technology has changed world. The concept of selling, promoting products have changed. Instead of brands going to customers physically, now they have used different method of communication. I will discuss the one method used frequently now. Hello. My name is Sarah, and I am a digital marketing expert. Today's topic is on podcast. How to start a podcast. Complete step-by-step guide. Launching a podcast can feel overwhelming if you're doing it by yourself, but you don't have to do it alone. Jump to a section. Step number 1. Develop a podcast concept. Step number 2. Choose your podcast format. Step number 3. Set up podcast recording equipment. Step number 4. Choose your podcast software. Step number 5. Record your first episode. Step number 6. Edit your audio. Step number 7. Create podcast artwork. Step number 8. Set up podcast in Buzzsprout. Step number 9. Get listed in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Step number 10. Launch and grow your show. Step number 1. Develop a podcast concept. Choosing the right podcast concept for your new podcast is a big part of attracting the right listeners and staying committed to your show. Follow these tips to narrow your niche and clarify your message. Define your goals. Why do you want to start a podcast? It's important to know your why, even if it's to have fun with friends. Some good reasons for starting a podcast are: 1. To generate leads for a business. 2. Be recognized as an industry leader. 3. Share an important message. Podcasting has a lot of benefits for brands and businesses, but it's important to be realistic about your goals. While some podcasters shoot to fame, most have a small target audience that they build over time. Pick a podcast theme or topic. You should feel excited to regularly discuss and research your podcast topic. The more you enjoy your topic, the less likely you'll experience pod fade. Once you have some ideas, do some market research to survey the competition in your genre. Search your show's topic in Apple Podcasts. Listen to a few episodes and ask yourself what you could do differently. There's always a unique angle or perspective to offer. Pro tip. To test out your own podcast concept, try to come up with 5 episode ideas. If ideas don't come easily, you might want to change topics. Make it specific. People are also more likely to recommend a niche podcast to a friend than a generic one. To make your podcast niche, focus on a subcategory or subdemographic. Drill down on what makes your podcast different. What unique perspective can you bring to your podcast's topic? Examples of finding a niche. Nutrition for diabetics. Business how to start a non-profit. Name your podcast. Your podcast name is a core part of your brand. It makes a strong first impression on listeners and sets a tone for your podcast. Here's Apple's advice on how to name your podcast. It's important to have a clear, concise name for your podcast. Make your title specific. A show titled or community bulletin is too vague to attract many subscribers, no matter how compelling the content. Pay close attention to the title as Apple Podcasts uses this field for search. Podcast names should have the following characteristics: specific and succinct, available, memorable, similar to your business name or brand. Once you have a title in mind, run it through a podcast name checker to make sure the social accounts and domains are available. You also don't want to use someone else's podcast name. Pro tip. Don't create podcast artwork yet. It's likely that you'll tweak your podcast concept before you release your episodes, and you don't want to have to redo your artwork. Step number 2. Choose your podcast format. Your format should complement your podcast and feel sustainable. Ask yourself what gives you energy. Do you love connecting with podcast guests, or do you feel you're best going solo? If you choose to have co-hosts, try to keep your group small. Podcasting with more than 2 or 3 people makes scheduling a challenge. Keep in mind that some shows require more production than others. For instance, fiction podcasts usually require more editing than interview podcasts. These are some common podcast formats: interview podcasts, co-hosted podcasts, scripted non-fiction, news recap, educational podcasts, scripted fiction. Optimal podcast episode length. Make your episodes as long as they need to be and no longer. Some podcasts are less than 5 minutes long, and others have episodes the length of a short audiobook. Here are the most common episode durations. Less than 10 minutes, 14%. 10-20 minutes, 15%. 20, 40 minutes, 31%. 40, 60 minutes, 22%. Over 60 minutes, 7%. Podcast publishing schedule. Podcasting can be a full-time job or something you do on the side. You might decide to publish daily or every 2 years like serial. We recommend publishing once a week to develop a connection with listeners and create the habit of producing consistent content. These are the most common publishing frequencies. 0, 2 days, 7%. 3, 7 days, 36%. 8, 14 days, 39%. 15, 29 days, 17%. Over 30 days, 1%. Step number 3. Set up podcast recording equipment. You don't have to buy expensive equipment to have good audio. Lots of popular podcasts have a basic setup. Let's review what to look for in a podcast microphone. Then, we'll make our top podcast equipment recommendations. Best podcast microphones. A good podcast mic enhances your audio quality and makes editing easier. Less background noise in your recording means less editing on the back end. Here are a couple of things to consider before getting your first podcast mic. Dynamic or condenser. Dynamic microphones work best for podcasting. They pick up lower frequencies and have less sensitivity. This means you'll have less background noise to edit out later. Condenser mics have more sensitivity and pick up a wider range of frequencies. Sensitivity is good for recording music, but isn't ideal for spoken word. XLR or USB. Podcast mics have 2 types of connections. XLR or USB. XLR mics give you maximum flexibility. There are a lot of XLR mics to choose from, and they usually have a long life. But XLR mics require an interface or mixer to hook up. This can get expensive for beginners. USB microphones are less expensive and plug directly into your computer. You can also run it through an interface if you record with multiple people. USB mics are affordable, practical, and sound great. This mic is the best option for the majority of podcasters. Top mic recommendations. Samson Q2U bar $70. PodMic bar $100. Shure SM7B bar $400. Example podcast setups. 1. One-person setup, $70. Samson Q2U bar $70. Any headphones you already have. 2. Two-person setup, $400. Samson Q2U bar $70, X2. Audio-Technica M20X bar $50, X2. Focusrite Scarlett 2i2 bar $160. 3. 3 to 4 person setup, $960, $1,080. Samson Q2U bar $70, X3 or 4. Audio-Technica M20X bar $50, X3 or 4. Rodecaster Pro bar $600. At $200, the Zoom P4 is a cost-conscious replacement for the Rodecaster Pro. Recommended accessories. Rode PSA-1 boom arm bar $120. Shock mount bar $35.50. Foam ball or pop filter bar $6 $10. Step number 4. Choose your podcast software. Once you've recorded your podcast, it's time to make edits. This is where you can structure your episode and optimize audio. Fortunately, podcast editing software is often affordable or even free. The free editing software are 1. Audacity, 2. GarageBand, 3. Descript. 1. GarageBand bar free. Difficulty, beginner. Compatibility, Mac and iOS. GarageBand comes pre-installed on most Apple computers. If you don't have it, you can easily download it for free. We think GarageBand is a more intuitive interface than Audacity. 2. Audacity bar free. Difficulty, moderate. Compatibility, Mac, Windows, and Linux. Audacity is a free, open-source audio editor with pro-level features. This store is more than enough for most podcasters to produce great episodes. 3. Descript bar $10 plus per month. Difficulty, moderate. Compatibility, Mac and Windows. Descript is an all-in-one editing tool that lets you record, transcribe, mix, and edit your audio files like you would a text document. Descript can automatically remove filler words and dub over a phrase with text-to-speech voice cloning. I hope that you are liking the video. Please like, share, comment and subscribe to the channel. Now let's move further. Remote recording software. If you frequently do remote interviews, you'll need software specifically for long-distance recordings. 1. Riverside.fm. Cost: $9 plus per month. Studio quality recordings. Riverside allows you to record local audio and video, even if you don't have a great internet connection. Users can take listener call-ins, live stream to social media, and edit videos within a browser. Files continuously upload to the cloud during recording, so you never lose your work. 2. Squadcast. Cost: $10 plus per month. Studio quality recordings. Squadcast makes it easy to set up a remote podcast interview and capture high-quality, lossless audio. Squadcast's sound quality is much better because it records local WAV files to each person's computer. The initial setup is more complicated than Zoom, but this tutorial can help. 3. Zoom. Cost: free $15/month. Average recording quality. Most guests have experience with Zoom. Zoom is a go-to remote recording tool with average audio quality, and most people already know how to use it. Step number 5. Record your first episode. Recording your episode requires a little preparation on the front end. Follow these 3 steps to set yourself up for success. 1. Write a podcast outline. Rambling is one of the most common mistakes new podcasters make, and the best way to fight this tendency is by writing a podcast script or outline. Even taking a few minutes to jot down a list of bullet points will dramatically improve the flow of your episode. If you're working with a co-host, share the outline with them so you can work on it together. 2. Pick a good place to record. If possible, record in a quiet room with lots of furniture, curtains, rugs, or carpet. Noise bounces off of hard, flat surfaces, so eliminate this where you can. You can also sound treat your space with foam panels on the walls. 3. Set up your recording equipment and software. Connect your mic to your computer or audio recording device. If you have a USB mic, plug a cable into your computer's USB port. If you have multiple hosts, run each mic through an audio interface and plug the interface into the computer. If you have an XLR mic, connect its cable to a USB interface or an external audio recording device like the PodTrack P4. Once plugged in, go to your audio editing software settings and select your audio input. Microphone technique. Position your mouth 2 to 4 away from the microphone for the cleanest sound, but the optimal distance may vary based on your microphone. If you notice too many plosives or harsh sibilants in your recordings, the simplest solution is to move off axis from the microphone. Set your mic up to the side, angled slightly toward your mouth. This adjustment prevents bursts of air from hitting the capsule and results in more natural audio. Record test track. Try recording yourself talking at a consistent volume at several different positions. Then, listen to the recording to see which position gave you the best audio quality. Don't worry about mistakes, stammers, or silence. You can make your edits in the next step. Step number 6. Edit your audio. Podcast editing is primarily for cleaning up the audio and making basic changes to the structure. Try to keep the process simple. If you focus too much on production, you'll get overwhelmed. Follow these 4 tips to streamline your editing workflow. 1. Create an engaging intro and outro. Your podcast intro lets you tell your listeners what you're about, the value you bring, and convince them to stick around. You can get royalty-free music for no cost, or purchase your show's intro music through one of these resources. Soundstrip. Audio Jungle. Story blocks. 2. Edit for content, then distractions. Edit for content on your first pass and work on noise issues, or other distractions on your second go-around. If you focus on noise issues too early, you might polish sections you remove later on. Focus on getting the content right first, then double back to fix audio issues. 3. Fade between tracks to remove unwanted noise. When you cut sections of audio, you can sometimes get little pops or clicks in the finished product. Use the fade tool at the beginning and end of clips if you run into those issues. 4. Create a punch list. If you don't want to listen to an entire episode multiple times, create a list of audio distractions to check during your second pass. This list can save time and ensure you don't miss anything. Step number 7. Create podcast artwork. Your podcast cover art is the first thing potential listeners see on Apple Podcasts or social media. Good artwork implies quality content, and 62% of new listeners are more likely to listen to a podcast if they like its cover art. Your podcast artwork should follow these technical specifications based on Apple's podcast artwork requirements. Square image, 3000 x 3000 pixels. Resolution of 72 pi. PNG or JPEG file types. Color space RGB. 5 tips to make your podcast artwork stand out. Follow these 5 tips to make artwork that stands out in podcast directories and attracts new listeners. Visually communicate the subject of the podcast. Potential listeners should know what your podcast is about just by looking at your artwork. Too much symbolism or ambiguity can turn people away. Design for a variety of sizes. You will use your artwork across several mediums and platforms, so it must look good even at 55 x 55 pixels. Don't use too many words or fonts. Don't use more than 4 words on your cover art, and make sure it's legible even in small sizes. You should also limit yourself to 2 complementary fonts. Avoid podcast imagery. Just as movie covers don't have pictures of DVDs and TV sets, your podcast cover art shouldn't show podcasting equipment. You don't need to remind people that they're listening to a podcast. Use consistent branding. Your podcast artwork is a part of your overall branding. Feel free to make subtle changes to artwork to fit various layouts and pages, but the imagery should stay consistent. Tools to design your podcast artwork. 1. Adobe Create Cloud Express. Adobe Creative Cloud Express, previously Adobe Spark, is a free service similar to Canva. Create a free account and browse a catalog of templates, text styles, and color palettes to design your unique podcast logo. When you're done, download your file as a .jpg or .png. 2. Fiverr. Fiverr is a more affordable way to outsource your artwork. Prices vary based on the experience of the designer. Make sure you pick a designer with examples of good artwork in their portfolio. 3. 99 Designs. 99 Designs lets you run a contest where designers compete to create the best design. Designers submit their ideas based on your guidelines, and you pick your favorite. Step number 8. Set up podcast in Buzzsprout. To get started, sign up for a free 90-day trial of Buzzsprout. If you decide to upgrade to a paid plan, you can upload up to 3 hours of new content every month. Fill out your podcast information. Go to Podcast Setting inside Buzzsprout to fill in your podcast title, artwork, and description. This information helps you appear in search engine queries. Your podcast description is where you tell listeners what they can expect from your content. It's also a good place to use keywords to draw people's attention. If you have a business podcast, use related words and phrases so readers know your content is relevant to them. Upload podcast artwork. Upload your podcast artwork into the designated field. You can upload artwork you already created or click the Canva button to create your cover art within the dashboard. Pick a podcast category. This is where you pick which category your podcast appears in Apple Podcasts, formerly iTunes. Pick the category that best fits your podcast. You can always change this later. You can also pick a subcategory to narrow your niche. It's better to be at the top of a subcategory than further down a general category. Upload your first episode. Drag and drop your file into the dashboard, and then schedule when you want it to go live. Individual episodes have their own metadata and can even have their own episode artwork. Write podcast show notes. Your episode description is where you can write your show notes. These notes show up with your episode in podcast apps and next to your episode on your podcast website. Quality show notes can help with your SEO and overall accessibility. Try to include these things in your show notes. Helpful links. Ancillary information. Contact information. Short summary of the episode. Most major apps support formatting within your episode notes, but not all do. Keep that in mind when you format your episode description text. Bonus features in Buzzsprout. Now that you have the basics done, you can check out these extras to optimize your podcast. Buzzsprout Customizable Website. Every podcast should have a website where your podcast lives. All Buzzsprout podcasters can create a free customizable website where you can keep your transcripts and episodes, and have more information on your podcast and hosts. You can set up this website within Buzzsprout, and put it on your own domain. This site is primarily for podcast listening, transcripts, and show notes. Transcripts. Transcripts help with your accessibility. Some people just prefer to read, rather than listen to your content. Within Buzzsprout, you can transcribe your episode using the Otter.ai integration, or transcribe it yourself. Upload your transcript, and we'll distribute it to every directory that supports transcripts. Magic Mastering. It's challenging to fine-tune your audio. Magic Mastering levels out your audio, removes background noises, and makes voices sound more full. Once you have an account, you can try out this feature for free on one episode. Visual Soundbites. Visual soundbites are video clips of your audio animated with an image and waveform. These soundbites are a great way to promote on social media and stand out in someone's feed. Posts with a visual component get an average of 7 times the engagement. Step number 9. Get listed in Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and Spotify. Podcast directories, like Apple Podcasts, are a centralized place for podcast listeners to find new shows. Getting listed in the top podcast directories is a critical part of your podcast marketing strategy. Most of your new listeners will find your podcast through these directories. Submit podcast to Apple Podcasts. Apple Podcasts is the #1 podcast directory in the world and accounts for 37.4% of all podcast downloads. Here's how to get into Apple Podcasts. Log in to Buzzsprout. Go to the Directories tab. Click Get Listed under Apple Podcasts. Log in to Apple Podcasts Connect. Click Validate. Click Submit. It can take up to 24 hours for a podcast to be approved, as Apple does a human review of every new podcast. You receive an email once your show is approved. Submit podcast to Spotify. Spotify launched its directory in 2018 and is now the second largest podcast directory, with 26.8% of all podcast downloads. Here's how to get listed on Spotify. Log in to Buzzsprout. Go to the Directories tab. Select Get Listed under Spotify. Select Submit Podcast to Spotify. Once you submit your podcast to Spotify, it should be listed almost immediately. Submit podcast to Google Podcasts. Google Podcasts makes your podcast visible in Google web searches and on Android phones. This directory accounts for 2.4% of all podcast downloads and works differently from its competitors. Rather than submitting your podcast to a directory, you just make sure Google can crawl your podcast website. You can manually submit your podcast RSS feed to Google to help speed up the process. Other podcast directories. Once you get listed in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, your podcast is in front of 95% plus of all podcast listeners. Submit to these smaller directories to further broaden your reach. Podcast Index. Amazon Music and Audible. Stitcher. Pandora. TuneIn. iHeartRadio. TuneIn Radio. Listen Notes. Step number 10. Launch and grow your show. When it's time to launch your podcast, you have 2 options. Choose whichever one feels best to you. Strategy number 1. The grand opening. The grand opening is when you build hype for your show before its launch. This is the approach used by most podcasters with an existing following. Pick a launch date a few weeks away and reach out to people who might be interested. You can pay for ads, submit to Apple Podcasts New and Noteworthy, or reach out to publications. Strategy number 2. The soft open. The soft open is more discreet. With this method, you publish episodes as if people are listening but wait on the promotion. When you see your podcast succeed in a lower pressure environment, it's easier to promote it more confidently. Imposter syndrome. A lot of podcasters feel like a fraud when they first start. Maybe you dislike your voice or don't feel qualified enough to speak on your topic. It's easy to sideline yourself, but you have a valuable perspective to offer. Know that this is a normal phase of podcasting that gets easier. 5 marketing tips to grow your listenership. 1. Share your podcast with friends and family. Share your podcast with loved ones and ask for feedback. You can get their honest opinions and have them leave your first reviews on Apple Podcasts. 2. Post episodes on social media. Sharing podcast content on social media helps you build a connection with your listeners. You can create visual soundbites for Facebook and Instagram, boost tweets on Twitter, and post content on LinkedIn. You could pick up 10 new listeners over your first few episodes if you do this right. 3. Join groups and forums. Providing value on forums like Reddit, Quora, or Facebook groups helps direct people to your podcast. Respond to relevant recent questions you can confidently answer. Include a link to one of your episodes to direct traffic to your podcast. Aim to post 1 or 2 answers like this for each new episode. 4. Cross-promote with other creators. Cross-promotion lets you partner with other podcasters and promote each other's shows. This marketing method lets you get your podcast in front of a new audience. You can reach out to fellow creators on Podchaser or find hosts' contact information on their websites or social media. 5. Overcast ads. The Overcast podcast app runs ads exclusively for podcasting. In our experience, we get 100 new subscribers each ad cycle. This is an excellent way to get your first 100 subscribers if you have the money. Celebrate your launch. If you've made it this far and are ready to publish your episode, we encourage you to submit it soon and celebrate your accomplishment.